Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR 96.3 HD2 and Sirius XM Channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher.
And that's heart-wrenching, right? The water will come in, the water will leave, and then these poor people will have to deal with the aftermath. Once again, what's next steps forward for them? They've lost their cars, they've lost their homes, but at the end of the day, I get it, it's material items, we'll rescue all the pets and keep them and themselves safe. But it's hard for me not to imagine the heartbreak that comes along with next steps. Where do those people go that don't have family? They don't have friends. They don't have the money to get a hotel. What happens to them?
That is Sheriff Chad Cronister. He is the sheriff of Hillsborough County, Florida. As you can see, rescue efforts continue across the state of Florida in the aftermath of Hurricane Milton. Rising floodwater continues to be of major concern, and at some point, evacuated residents will return. But return to what? How will they restart? How will they rebuild? What kind of insurance will cover the damage? Well, tonight, we're talking about weather-related insurance. Now, the damage caused by hurricanes Helene and Milton is in the southeastern part of the country. But as we all know, the DMV is not immune. We've seen our share of storms. We've seen our share of flooding, even an earthquake. So we're going to give you helpful information to help keep your home safe as you ponder the difficult weather news of the past 2 weeks. My guest is Joy Hatchett, Associate Commissioner for Consumer Education and Advocacy at the Maryland Insurance Administration. Joy, good to see you again. Thanks for talking to us.
Thanks so much for inviting me. And I am always happy to see you, but sad that it has to be on an occasion like this.
That's right. And on that particular point, when you looked at the video and heard what the sheriff was saying, what kind of goes through your mind from your official position when you just look and you see all of the damage, the flooded houses and the like?
So I'm going to be very honest with you, Harold. Generally speaking, people in the DMV area, they look at what's happening in Florida, in Georgia, and in South Carolina and say, how horrible for them. What a major horrible event for them. I'm so glad that we live here. They don't necessarily think that these types of flooding and wind events and damage as a result can happen right here. It doesn't have to be a hurricane for us to have flood damage. In the DMV area, most of us know certain places flood as a result of a heavy rain.
Yeah.
And if they have a heavy rain, they can have significant damage. We all remember Isabel.
Right.
We remember Sandy.
Yeah.
But 2 or 3 weeks ago, when they were getting all of that, before all of this happened, we had flooding right here in the district almost every other week when they have heavy rain. Folks in Maryland, they remember Ellicott City. What I try to make sure that when we see these things that are happening in Florida, don't dismiss them and think, oh, we're so lucky. We live in the DMV and it could never happen here. We still need to prepare and at least think about, if something like this happens, are we ready and can we recover?
You know, as you went through that list, and I began to really think about some of the things that we have experienced and still experience in the DMV. And for example, I remember many years ago, my father and my stepmother had a house in Anne Arundel County in a private community called Columbia Beach. And I remember my father said at one point that Hurricane Hugo that came through behind the house, there was 100 yards of beach before there was the water. Hurricane Hugo destroyed the beach, and so the water was right up to the break wall. We know, for example, that in Alexandria, Virginia, right on the waterfront, they're constantly having flooding from a really sturdy rain. Prince George's County, Upper Marlboro, they're still having issues with flooding, and I can go on and on and on. And so I think, to your point, those are the kinds of things that, while people in the DMV think that they may very well be immune, that they really aren't.
They aren't. And right beside Morgan State, there are plenty of areas that when there's a heavy rain, that area floods. And it's not just, as you mentioned, it's not just flood damage. We get those heavy winds, which will tear the roof off, do heavy damage to your siding. So people just, and what I say is, you just need to plan and figure out not if, but when some of these bad things happen. What can you do? And are you ready? I mean, a lot of times people will think, well, I'll be able to get funding from this organization or that organization. And frequently you can get some, but you also need to be ready to protect yourself, or at least acknowledge that, okay, I'm not going to buy insurance. I'm not going to take these steps. So if I have a loss, there's not going to be a way for me financially to pay for the recovery.
Let's talk about home ownership. I'll talk about rental insurance later, but let's just talk about homeowners insurance. And there are different kinds of homeowners insurance, and certainly different companies. But generally speaking, does a homeowner's insurance policy, for example, in the state of Maryland, does it cover hurricanes?
So what it basically, a homeowner's insurance policy covers what we refer in the insurance area as perils. So it covers perils.
Okay.
So it covers things like wind damage, certain types of water damage, certain types of other types of damage. Not a quote unquote hurricane, but it's the types of damage that might come from a hurricane. Now, under our standard homeowners insurance policy, flooding is not going to be covered. You have to buy a separate flood insurance policy. But that doesn't mean that your homeowner's insurance policy doesn't cover some types of water damage. And so I tell people to think about it like this. If the water comes directly from the sky into your roof and you've kept your roof up, then generally speaking, your homeowner's policy will cover that. If there's a sudden an accidental burst of a pipe, your homeowner's insurance will cover that. If you have a sump pump and the sump pump can't keep up with the water that's entering through a door, sometimes a homeowner's insurance policy will cover that. But that's going to really depend on your specific policy. That said, if water comes through the ground into your home because of a flood outside, that's going to be considered flood damage and, generally speaking, not covered by your homeowner's policy.
So, for example, if I may, a lot of people in Florida live near rivers or lakes. And so you're suggesting that if, for example, you live, and having lived in Florida, I've certainly seen this in North Florida, in the Tallahassee suburbs, where people have wonderful houses and they live on the lakes, and they worry about alligators too, but that's another conversation. You have to wonder if your homeowner's insurance covers that. But if the lake begins to rise and that water comes from that lake, that's considered a flood.
Correct.
Okay.
But also, if you've got a heavy rain and it's raining so hard that that water seeps from the ground into your house, that also could be considered a flood. So people say, well, I don't live next door to a river or a stream or the ocean. But then my question is, the last time we had a really heavy rain, did you see ponding or did you see water flowing toward your home? Then you've got a higher propensity to have flooding. And then what I frequently hear, and I'm going to tell you, it just drives me nuts. People will say, well, I don't live in a flood zone, so I don't have to worry about it. The last time I looked, the water didn't know where the flood zone started and stopped. The water's going to go where the water's going to go. So you really need to know your property. And if you have a propensity to be in an area that might flood, not telling you that you have to get it, but you should consider purchasing flood insurance.
Wow, this is fascinating. Just so many, I have so many questions, and I'm sure that our listeners have kind of glued in on this, and hopefully we can share as much as possible. I'm going to take a break in a bit, but do you have any information, at least for Maryland residents, as to where they can find information about weather-related insurance outside of their insurance carriers, and where they might look in other states if they live in DC or if they live in Virginia or the surrounding area?
So every state has an insurance commissioner, an office just like mine. So they should for the folks in Maryland, I'll give you the information of how to get in touch with us. But for the folks in DC or Virginia, just Google Virginia Insurance Department, District of Columbia Insurance Department, and contact them. And they will have hopefully something similar to what we have. We have a website that is full of information about disaster preparedness, flood insurance, homeowners insurance. And our website is insurance.maryland.gov.
One more time, please.
Insurance.maryland.gov.
Stand by. We are going to take a break, but don't forget you can hear this in every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on WHUR.com. That link will also be on the WHUR.com webpage as well. The Original Quiet Storm is coming up next on WHUR. I'm Harold Fisher. This conversation continues on Sirius XM channel 141 and 96.3 HD2 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our discussion about weather-related insurance. My guest is Joy Hatchett. She is the Associate Commissioner for Consumer Education and Advocacy at the Maryland Insurance Administration. Joy, before we continue, wanted to once again just share with you some of the things that we've heard coming out of Florida.
Surreal. And it just, you see it on the news of other people. You feel for them. You know, I've seen it when it was flooded over here, and Debbie, you know, I felt for them. It's unbelievable. I mean, I know it's material things, but I gotta start all over again. You know, everything I had there is no good. Thank God I have flood insurance, but it's gonna be a long time before we can come back. As it was, the sewer didn't work anymore because it was flooded. It was saturated.
If that gentleman said that he had flood insurance, good for him. Hopefully that flood insurance will work. When you talk about flood insurance, Joy, where do you get your insurance from? Do you buy it from the same place that you get your homeowner's insurance or elsewhere?
So you've got a couple of options. You can talk to the same insurance company that sold you your homeowner's policy. And many of those companies do offer flood insurance. Or you can go directly to the National Flood Insurance Program and buy that policy from them. But whether you're buying, and what I'm going to refer to it as NFIP policy, whether you're buying that NFIP policy from your insurance company or the NFIP directly, they all are the same policy. Because the NFIP policy, unlike your homeowner's company, those policies and what they cover and how much they cover is all maintained by the federal government. So it's the federal flood policy. So it doesn't matter if you get it from a major company or you go directly to the NFIP, you're going to get the same policy. Now, there are a few private companies that will sell private flood insurance. And if you look at our website, you can get that list. But I just tell people, no matter where you buy it from, you need to understand it. Because when you buy it, and just a couple of things.
Sure.
When you buy your homeowner's insurance policy, you basically buy one policy and everything's included, the structure and your stuff. Flood insurance is not that way. With flood insurance, you have to buy one policy for the structure and a totally separate policy for your stuff. And so some people will make a decision in order to save money, they'll just buy the policy for the structure. And that's fine. That's a personal decision. But just make sure that when you're getting ready to buy that flood policy, you understand what you're purchasing. The other big thing, and this is a major difference. Basements. Things that are in the basement are not generally covered under a flood policy unless it's one of those things that is considered an electronic item to make for the well-being of your home, like your AC unit or things of that nature. Your flood policy will cover those. But let's say you decide you love football, and so you're going to turn your basement into a man cave. That fancy television that's down there, that leather couch and everything else, if it floods, it's not covered.
Even if now, let me make sure I understand. So if I have a flood policy and I also buy that separate policy to cover my stuff, is the stuff in my man cave covered?
No.
Wow.
And then I also will hear people say, well, I got this flood policy for the structure. Then can't I rely on my homeowner's policy for my stuff? No. Your homeowner's policy carves all of that out. So if you have a flood in your basement and you think you've got all the policies, you've got a homeowner's policy, you've got both parts of the flood policy, and you've now got this wonderful man cave, big flood, all that stuff is so sad, too bad. So this is what we tell people. First of all, if you have a home that has a propensity for flooding, do not use the basement as a man cave.
Okay.
And but some people need that basement because they use it, especially in Baltimore City, where the major, then what we tell them is, okay, let's think about it. Get some shelves. Don't put things directly on the floor. Put your things that are valuable up on shelves. Just make sure that you're thinking through. So not if, but when there's a flood, your damage will be limited.
Now, what if you had a personal property insurance policy with your homeowner's insurance and your basement floods as a result of inclement weather? Still not covered.
If it's because of flooding. Now, let's say your basement floods, you've got a sump pump. And the sump pump, for whatever reason, can't keep up with the water. Depending on the terms of your policy, your terms of your homeowner's policy, there may be coverage.
Wow.
Some sump pumps, the resulting damage, if there's an electrical outlet caused by something other than a defect, some companies will cover that. So it's truly policy driven.
If you have a flooding insurance policy, okay, let's just say I'm watching all of this stuff in Florida. I'm watching what's happening in North Carolina, Georgia, and South Carolina. And I'm thinking, ooh, let me go ahead and get something because we are still in hurricane season right now. How long before it becomes active?
30 days.
30 days.
Unless
so if I buy it today, I gotta hope that there is no hurricane that would affect the DMV before November 11th.
There are some exceptions. So let's say you're getting a brand new home and your lender says, because some lenders will say this, we're not going to go to closing unless you have a flood insurance policy.
I see.
So the closing won't happen. In those instances, generally speaking, most of the time, that flood insurance policy is effective immediately. But that's because that's a new purchase of a home. But other than that, it's a 30-day waiting period.
So let me ask you about this, because one of the other things that we've heard so much about lately, and obviously this is maybe particular to Florida, that homeowners have not been getting what they expect to get based on their homeowner's policy. So here's a hypothetical. If I get a homeowner's policy and I have a $500,000 house, hurricane comes in, and my house, when I come back after evacuating, and I come back and all there is a blank space because my house has been completely washed away, shouldn't I get the value of my policy?
So if that home was destroyed because of flooding, flood insurance through the National Flood Insurance Program, the limits of the policy are $250,000. So the policy will never pay any more than $250,000. So if you have, let's just say that everybody agrees that your home was totally destroyed by the flood. But if your home is worth more than $250,000, you're not going to get any more than that.
Mm.
But that's actually the case also with regular homeowners insurance. Let's say, and this is why we tell people really always review your policy. Let's say that you have a homeowners insurance policy and your home, the value to rebuild it, it may cost $400,000. But if you've only got $300,000 of coverage, that's all that policy is going to pay. Period. The end. So it's important to understand how much coverage you actually have. Now, the case that you gave was a relatively easy case because the house was gone.
Right.
But let's say you have a case where the house isn't gone, but it's been damaged. And so you may say, well, I've got $200,000 worth of damage. The insurance company's adjuster comes out and says, not so much. We're looking at it and we're only going to pay X amount of dollars. So there are two ways that insurance companies make decisions on how much to pay based on the scope. So when I say scope, let's say you've got a 5-room home. The insurance company could come in and say, you could say all 5 of my rooms are damaged. The insurance company might say, we see damage in 3 rooms. That's a scope question. So you will have to go back and forth with your insurance company to get the scope decided and agreed upon. Then once you agree on the scope, it's then the cost to repair what's in the scope. So there are 2 pieces to that cost: labor and materials. So your contractor may say, it's going to take me 20 hours to fix this. Their contractor may say, oh, this is a 2-hour job. So you've got to agree on that. And then the cost of materials. So there's lots of pieces to that. And what insurance is complicated stuff.
Sounds like it. Yeah.
But just visit we have so much information, and we know that people take their information differently. We have information you can read. We have videos. Then we go out to events. You can call us. So, and after a disaster or an event, we generally have a virtual time where people can come virtually and ask us questions.
Here's another question before I move on to rental insurance. And this is another one of those situations that we saw last week in Florida, where the state and even the National Weather Service was suggesting get out, pack up and get out. Is there any insurance that would cover evacuation?
So under the if you have a national flood insurance policy, and like just happened in Florida, they say you need to get out. I don't remember the dollar amount, but there is money in that policy to help you basically shore up your home and do certain steps. That's if you have that flood insurance policy. Now, there's nothing like that at this point. Well, I'm going to say that I'm aware of. There are new types of insurance that are always being developed. I'm not aware of anything like that on the standard homeowners insurance policies, but I do know under the National Flood Insurance Program, if you have one of their policies, they have a way for you to get some money to help protect your home if you're ordered to evacuate.
Let's talk a little bit about renters insurance in the case of a storm or natural disaster. What does renters insurance cover?
So it's all about knowing the type of renters insurance you have, because there's the standard renters insurance, but then there's also policies that some renters get that protect the landlord. And so that basically protects the structure, not you. So I tell people, I think that renters insurance is something that every renter should consider. And we have information on our website about that. But you need to understand if that policy is protecting you or the landlord. And renters insurance, if you have the standard policy, what that does is it covers all of your belongings if there's damage to the apartment. It also covers getting you another place to live if you can't live in that apartment. But you also need to understand when you're getting renters insurance, and we use this term early on, peril. What types of perils does this particular renters insurance policy cover? Years ago in Baltimore City, we had an instance where an entire apartment structure, there was a tornado and it took the roof off. And the renters were feeling great. They were like, well, we have renters insurance. I took a look at their policies. They had renters insurance to protect them from a fire only. Their damage was caused by the wind. Absolutely no protection. So it's important that you know and understand who the policy protects and what it protects you from.
I want to talk about vehicle damage. If after a hurricane, tornado, flood, or what have you, and you wake up the next day and your car is gone, it has been washed into the next neighborhood, or blown into the next neighborhood, what covers that? Is that automobile insurance? How does that work?
So if you have full coverage on your automobile, yes. However, in most states, full coverage is not required. You only have to have coverage if you damage someone else's property. Liability only. People will drop full coverage because liability only is cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you have liability only, and you have that instance where your car gets flipped over by the wind. It's a total loss. You will get zero from the insurance company because you have liability only. We had, once again, and I hate to keep giving these examples from Baltimore City, but we had people that were parked along the street and the street collapsed. Cars fell in.
I remember that. Yeah.
People that had full coverage, no problem. People that had liability only, no money from the insurance company.
Wow. That's so. I want to go back to another home related thing. And I remember you and I had this conversation before, but I think it's great to kind of revisit. If there's been a storm, rain, water saturated ground, and a tree falls and damages your home, homeowners insurance, how does that work? If the tree is in your yard or if it's in your neighbor's yard, what's the difference, and how is it covered?
So your tree damages your home, your insurance is responsible for that.
Mm-hmm.
Your neighbor's tree damages your home, your insurance is responsible for that. Even though it's your neighbor's tree, the only way your neighbor might be responsible, and in this case, because we know that we've got these storms going on, probably not, but let's say it's a sunny day.
Mm-hmm.
And your neighbor's tree falls on your house and does damage. Unless your neighbor was on notice that their old dead tree was going to fall on your house, that is your responsibility, even though it was the neighbor's tree.
But your homeowner's insurance should cover that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Now, we said it fell on your house.
Right.
If it falls on a fence, they will cover the portion of the fence that's damaged. You don't get to get a whole new fence.
Mm-hmm.
If it falls in the yard, depending on the terms of your policy, but for most policies, if it's not in the way and you can get in and out of your driveway,
Mm-hmm.
then they will give you a portion, and usually it's $500, which is not much for trees these days, to pay for removal. But they're not going to pay to remove a tree that's just in your yard.
Mm-hmm.
And usually, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, please go ahead. Finish.
Usually, I mean, especially what we've seen with these big winds, several trees will fall. 500, period. It's not per tree, period. Right. So if you've got 4 or 5 trees, and usually trees cost maybe a couple $1,000, you can have $500. Have a nice day.
You know, something that happened in my neighborhood a couple of months ago, we had a storm, and this is not a humble brag, as the young people say, but there was a Maserati parked on the street, and I was driving down the street and around the corner in my neighborhood, and I see a tree. It was parked on the street, and a tree fell and crushed it. Fortunately, no one was in it, but it was parked, and it was a perfect, not so perfect. I mean, and we're talking about a tree that was probably about in circumference, probably about a good 5 feet. It was a big tree across 5 feet, maybe 4 feet. It was a big tree. What do I know? But it fell on the roof and completely crushed it. And it sat there crushed for a couple of weeks before the tree was removed, and then the car sat there for longer. And so I guess my question is, I'm insured. So if that had happened to my car, my insurance company would have immediately addressed it. This is speculation, but I'm just wondering, why did it take so long?
It could have taken a long time for a couple of reasons. First of all, it was going to be that person's auto insurance.
Mm-hmm.
So did they, even though they had an expensive car, what kind of coverage did they have? And what kind of deductible did they have? A lot of people these days, to bring the premium down, are really raising their deductibles. And sometimes they're raising them to amounts they can't afford.
Yeah.
And so if you've got a $3,000 or $4,000 deductible,
Oh, wow.
you can't come
Yeah.
up with that money, then yeah, that car's going to sit for a good minute.
Yeah. Maybe that's what it was. It was a beautiful car.
Mm-hmm.
It's gone now, long gone now, but yeah, it was certainly heartbreaking. But I guess the best thing is that no one was in the car when that happened. Joy Hatchett, thank you so much. I always learn so much when I have an opportunity to talk to you and give you an opportunity to share information. You are a wealth of knowledge.
Well, thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me. And maybe one of these days we're going to talk on a blue sky day.
How about that? Maybe we can find a way to get some sunshine insurance.
There you go.
Joy, thank you so much. That is the Daily Drum for this Friday, October 11th. For News Director Renee Nash, reporters Millette Green and Bermonte Bryant, I'm Harold Fisher. Good night and have a wonderful weekend.